And good morning, I guess, to most of you. At least for me, being in Northern Europe, it's already late afternoon, but I'm still happy to talk to you today. So my name is Ivan, and we'll be talking about feedback. And before we dive into the topic, let me first introduce myself and tell you why I'm talking about the feedback today. So I am a level 3 judge from Northern Germany, from Hamburg, Germany, originally from Croatia. And I've been working with this topic for at least 15-ish years as part of the judge community. Back then, when we had spheres, I was also heavily involved in the coaching sphere, which was talking about the soft skills. And in a non-judging life, I am working as a coach, consultant, also being experienced leading people. So feedback is something I do on a daily basis, and it's one of my passions for studying. Where is everybody from? Yes, if you want, please do write in the chat. I know it's probably very early for some of you, but it actually helps me a lot because feedback is a very cultural specific topic. So, and thank you, Peter, for asking the question. And yeah, you can either you can write it, or you can put the flags. Cool. And yeah, that maybe brings me to the first topic. Please use the chat for any questions. Also use it for chatting. And please also bring your topics around feedback, bring your cases, bigger situations, because I've been giving this presentation for a couple of years now, and the slides are similar or the same, but it's always different because the audience is different and audience comes with different questions. So there is no such thing as stupid questions. Do take some coffee, do take some tea, or do take something to stay hydrated and to give you the necessary kick to participate. But yeah, I'm looking forward to spending the next 50-ish minutes or so with you on this lovely topic. So what we'll be talking about today, we'll be talking about feedback. Surprise, surprise. We'll be talking about giving feedback. We'll be talking about receiving feedback. As part of giving feedback, I'll walk you through the steps of the model. Then we're talking about receiving, and in receiving feedback, you're going to see that the steps are more or less same or very similar. So I'll be focusing more on the mindset. And speaking of mindset, this is, in my humble opinion, probably the most important message and the most important slide. Because if you don't have the right mindset regarding feedback, then all of the technique, all of the tools don't matter. So I'm seeing there is some Ivan is having some issues with audio video. Okay, so I'm seeing that the majority of people are having good. Yeah, even if it doesn't work after restarting, then maybe ping one of the admins. Maybe they can help you. Okay, good. Then let me continue talking about the gifts. And let me start with a story. And the story is, when I was younger and I would get gifts for a birthday or something, I wanted to get toys. But my grandparents would give me pieces of clothing like shirts or trousers or something more practical and useful. And I wasn't necessarily super happy about it, right? Because, I get those things from my mother anyway, and it's nothing super special, but, it felt more like a gift for her than for me. But over the years, I grew up and I noticed that, even though I don't get a perfect gift when someone gives me a gift, I learned to recognize it for what it stands. And it stands that someone has, took the time to think about what I might like. And, it's a sign of an expression, right? Showing expression of appreciation and thinking about, right? And that's what in the end is important, right? So what it has to do with feedback is when someone gives us feedback, the person took a courage and took time to find a way how to give us this information, right? Because it's easier is not to give anything, right? Especially when talking about the critical stuff. So we should appreciate feedback given, even if it's not in, nicely, perfectly wrapped. On the other hand, also, when I am giving feedback to someone, I am thinking about what is that wrapping, what is that thing that a person might like, and how should I package it, to make the gift even nicer, right? To make it even there. It's not about, in terms of feedback, it's not about not telling something, right? It's not the empty box. It's not something that it needs to be valuable to the person, right? So, and that valuability comes from information we wanna share, especially when it's a critical feedback. So, but the way how you package this, right? There is a different reaction person gonna get if it's a gift like this here, or if it's something, which is like kind of a little bit, loosely wrapped in something and dripping and having stains and stuff like that, right? Does this make sense in this mindset? Because I notice a lot of times in organizations I'm working with, and also in the judge program, that people were telling me, coming to me like, I really wanted to tell this person feedback, and I gave them feedback, and then, they just didn't accept it, and they were mad at me, and I just wanted to do a good deed, and in the end, it backfired. And that's what we'll be talking about today. So we'll be talking about this, how to do this packaging, how to do this wrapping, how to deliver this feedback in a way that this information in a way that actually a person receiving it wants to accept it. And that's what we are going to start about. So the framework I'm using, it consists of 4 steps, and it's something that I originally, it's a mixture of a couple of frameworks. You can find them out there. And usually people ask me, okay, Ivan, what's the relationship with what you're teaching to nonviolent communication or to this or that book? And you can find that the elements are usually there across different, this is just something that works for me quite a lot, and I've been teaching it for years, and generally feedback about this feedback tool has been positive. And now I'm going to guide you through it. So the first step is observation coming from you as a feedback giver. So this is written from the perspective of a person giving feedback. Then next one is understanding first, then communicating your need as a feedback giver, and then formulating behavior request. So it looks here like a list, but it's more of a process, right? This is a general steps one should take. However, that doesn't mean, you do one sentence in this one, then you check it off and you move to the next one. Quite often, we're going to be talking later about how all these steps combine and what does it make it, how much time do we spend into each of those? And in the end, there is not a formula where I tell you, 5% or 5 minutes you spend in step number 1, and then a little bit more in step number 2, and then 10 minutes in step number 3. So in the end, you will need to practice to get a feeling for it. But I'm going to tell you how you can notice if you have moved too quickly. But let's dive into the steps a bit deeper, and then we'll see a little bit later how it all ties together. So observation coming from you. So there are 2 parts. One is about observation, another one is coming from you. So the first one, let's talk about coming from you. So one of the things where I see feedback backfiring is when usually a person comes and talks about the group or talks about someone else, right? I'm fine, I have no problem with what you just happened, but they have seen, or they have a problem with this, or we have a problem with this. And one of the important things for me is that feedback is a conversation, right? And maybe that's somewhere where we might, I might disagree with some of the methodologies out there. For me, feedback needs to be a 2-way stream. And it's very difficult to have a conversation if you don't know who you're conversing with. So if I'm receiving feedback and someone says, we have observed, okay, but, I can't talk to we, I can only talk to you, right? Or even worse, if they have seen, right? Someone is talking about someone else. So at that point, you can usually just take it at a face value. One thing I do when I'm usually faced with this type of feedback as a receiver, if someone comes, we have seen this, we have observed this, we want to talk about this, then I ask the person coming to me and says, okay, are you part of this we? And usually then the person is a bit confused. And then I said, yes. And I said, good. Okay. Thank you for bringing me the message for the others, but I would like to focus first hearing from you what you have observed and what's the feedback you want to give me, right? So I try to turn it from we to I type of observation. And just to have a conversation, right? And if the person comes with they have seen, then I would say, okay, so then I ask the person, are you empowered to represent the group? Do you have enough information? Can I go in a conversation with you as a representative of that group, right? Because if the person says, no, I can't really, then, okay, well, you can still take the information, but it's not in the end the real feedback. And by the way, you can ask questions at any point while I'm talking, right? I'll be making pauses and asking for resonance, but don't, I'm looking at the chat while I'm talking. So, and I'm super happy to come back to your questions and your situations, especially if some of these things resonate and you want to go a bit deeper, please write it down and don't be scared, right? Look, I always am a bit paranoid when I see someone typing, then I say, oh, cool, there is a question coming, and the typing stops. But anyway, just shoot your stuff. I like to do these presentations more in person, and I've been doing quite a lot of these teachings also in the Americas or in the US. Yeah, I know it's morning, so Sharon, so yeah, people are maybe shy. Let's give it a while, right? It's gonna get easier later. No coffee yet. Okay, good. So this is the first part about observation coming from you as a feedback giver. Second one, let's talk about what observation is. And in the end, observation should be a fact-based as much as is possible, right? In the end, it's impossible to be, and this is gonna sound a bit mouthful, to be objective about one's own subjectivity, right? We are always, we are interpreting reality around us, reality with question marks, because, in the end, something what is real for me might not be real for you, right? Some of the things we can talk about science and other stuff, but, generally, we perceive life with our own eyes. So therefore, we need to put some effort to try to distill what is a fact and as objectively really or real as possible, and what is an interpretation. And I can give an example. So for example, this, you arrived 5 minutes after we agreed. In the first version of the slides, when I was doing it, the sentence was saying you arrived 5 minutes late. And then one of the people told me, Ivan, isn't late already an interpretation, right? Because it has an assumption in there. And I said, yes, that's true. And then this sentence even got a bit more mouthier, right? And this is one of the things. Also, interpretations are, why do we like to do them? Because they're quicker, they're faster, right? You're late is faster, and this is how we feel in the end, right? We mix our feelings together with that fact that, or this thing we have perceived, this event we have perceived, right? And then we kind of, our brain and our feelings together come with this interpretation, and this is what we in the end react on, right? So it takes then active effort to unpack this, right? So this is why we do not generate facts, but we generate interpretations. And problem is, if we just go with interpretations, the person doesn't have their own interpretation. And then we basically start to discuss and argue about what has just happened, right? The idea of this first step is to establish a common basis on which we can agree. And for that, trying to be as objective and try to describe reality as impartial from our own feelings and interpretation and our own shades, right? That's what actually is needed here, to have a common ground first. So what has happened that I, as a feedback giver, have observed that has created in me a need now to give this feedback, okay? And one very important part of this one is this part especially, or others as well, but this one is very, very depending on the culture norms. Let me tell you a story about my good friend that some of you maybe know, Matteo Calighieri, known as Cale, who is from Italy. And he and I have been judging events for ages, and we usually go for dinner in between the days of bigger events. And then we usually say, okay, and we agree, let's meet at 8 o'clock at the hotel lobby. And we said, sure, fine. And then I was there at 8, he was not. I was still there at 8:05, he was not. I was still there at 8:10, he was not. And then he arrived at 8:12. And I was like, you're late. And he's like, I'm not. And then, I realized I did interpretation. I said, okay, you're alive 12 minutes after we agreed to meet. And he said, yes. And I said, isn't that you being late? He said, no. And then I asked him, okay, please explain me. And we unpacked it and learned about Italian culture where, plus minus, 10 to 15 minutes is still not considered late. And now me understanding this, actually, I'm gonna now not want to jump through the entire process of feedback, but in the end, we agreed on having a label. And now when we are agreeing to meet somewhere, we agree, are we meeting at 8 o'clock German time or are we meeting at 8 o'clock Italian time? And this is something we established maybe a decade ago, and we are still using it today whenever we are meeting. So the culture norm here is basically creating a fact, right? Within the Italian culture, just to use this example of lateness, right? 10-ish minutes is still not considered late, right? Because word late is interpretation. So if you know the culture in which you are working, operating, right, or interacting with people, then you know that this is the norm. This is the fact, de facto fact, right? Because this is how a majority of people is behaving, right? So fact is what we are expecting the people to just know and understand. Any questions around this one? Okay, let's go to next. So this is probably the most difficult step. And the reason why it's so difficult to understand the other side before me as a feedback giver is being understood is because, again, I have observed something. That something has created certain need in me, right? It can be disagreement. It can be like, I have a certain unmet need. I have a certain, agitation, and I want to let it out. And that's the reason why I have starting with this feedback process. But this step says, no, it's not your turn yet. First, understand the other person, the person you're giving feedback. And after you have understood them, then they can help, understand your context. Okay, so this is the point where we need to kind of, deal with those emotions, and we'll be talking about dealing with emotions a little bit later. We need to deal with these things, and we need to, understand. And why we need to understand them, there is a practical reason for it. So first one is, again, we want this to be a conversation. And if a person feels understood, then the person also wants to communicate. And oppositely, if a person doesn't, then the person is going to become defensive. And that's what we don't want to do, right? Secondly, if we understood their context, maybe our feedback will change, right? And let me give you another story. When I was much younger, somewhere in high school, I was meeting a friend for cinema. And we agreed in school on the same day. And then I was, again, waiting for my friend. I came a little bit earlier. My friend never arrived. By the way, this was a time before cell phones. Yes, I'm a little bit older. So there wasn't ability to just text message and check where the person is, right? And the next day when I saw a person, or the next time when I saw the person in school, I was like, I was very, very mad. My friend stood me up, and I was like, what happened? And I was like, I felt like super stupid and disrespected, and you never showed up. This is not cool. I started jumping on them. And then that person basically told me, yeah, my father died. You can imagine how I felt in that case, right? just imagine if I asked a question at that point, instead of, starting raving on that person why, being late or not showing up is very disrespectful. Yeah, I would probably not do that if I had this piece of information. Yeah. Yeah, life is a good teacher, right? So here it's important to understand the other side, because if you understand the other side, then it makes it much easier to do the other steps. So as I said, one thing, opens communication, because the people like to be understood, and being understood also creates a feeling of safe space, which again enables communication. And second thing, what we actually want to achieve in the end might change with this additional information we get. And in the end, it is about asking questions and not making statements, which is what I did in my personal story. Usually when I talk about feedback as part of my management training, we spend the entire day, and then we talk about asking questions at least an afternoon. And usually participants, they say like, Ivan, why are we going to talk so much about asking questions? Of course I know how to ask a question. I've been asking my questions my entire life. Well, yeah, people have, but then we also forget a lot of things. And we don't have a time to go into that depth, but just one point is be careful about asking the why question, especially within the English speaking language. And again, a lot of things what I'm speaking here is coming from the culture of Western Europe, US based literature, right? And why is a bit of a loaded question in a way that I was reading a study and says people have a problem with the word why, because the word why sounds very challenging, especially if you add a little bit of, tonality and you ask someone, why did you do that, right? It can feel very judgy, and it can feel also, like the person needs to justify themselves for their choice. Problem with the word why is because at some point we were kids and we were asking a lot of questions. A lot of them were why. If some of you are parents, maybe this sounds familiar to you. At some point we grow up, and nobody tells us we have grown up, and nobody tells us now it's no longer okay to ask a question why. And then we get a trouble, and then we learn to maybe not ask these questions at all, and then we at some point switch to statements. So if you still want to use a word, if you still want to ask a why question, there is a way to ask it without using the word why, because it's actually a problematic part. One thing what I'm using is please help me understand what happened there. I'm curious. I would like to know more, right? So using those type of formulations, especially when you're also asking for help, because a lot of people, most of the people in the world want to be helpful, you're de facto getting the underlying information without having this sound or this, potential judgmental, accusatory tone, like, why did you do that? Does this make sense, my dear audience? Why? Thank you. Any questions so far? Any cases, any stories you want to bring to? Be free to also chat. I know it's early, but we've been now doing 20 minutes, so I'll take some water. Maybe some people want to ask a question. Okay, not seeing anybody typing, so let's move on. There's also going to be Q&A towards the end. So, okay. And by the way, just before I go, this step is again not a list, right? So this is a conversation. I usually, in the case with me and Matteo, in that case, I said, when he told me like, yeah, when I realized it, he told me I'm 12 minutes after we have agreed, but he doesn't see it late. My answer was, my basically default opener was, please help me understand. I'm curious. And that's how I usually start this step. Okay, I observed you coming 12 minutes after we agreed. Help me understand what's going on. Or I can just tell you what's going on, right? Again, tonality can play a little bit on what's your relationship. Matteo and I are good friends, so I can also ask you probably a why question and it'll still be fine. So, and by the way, please make sure that this step doesn't look like an interview process, right? It's not about you shooting questions. One of the things you can also do here when you hear something back, you can say, okay, okay, so thanks for sharing this. I didn't know this about, Italian culture. Or, okay, makes sense, Can you help me understand just this aspect? Or, okay, I understand this part, but this is something I would like to know more. Can you explain me a bit more, right? So stop to resonate, to reflect, to summarize what you have heard, right? Because it also helps the person feeling they are being understood, right? Because again, interviews and just, shooting questions are not the most pleasant affair. Okay. I'm going to the next part. Samuel, just keep typing. And I'll come back to your question. So now that you understand the context of the other person, now it's time to give our context to the person. And by the way, if we did the context first, right, like in this unfortunate real life story with me and my friend whose father died, right, I gave my context first, which was me being, super pissed and unhappy and feeling disrespected, right? But yeah, that context didn't stand when I understood their context. So this is now where we do this. Again, do it in a polite way, right? I usually say, okay, I understand what's going on. Are you interested? Or, I would like to share also what brought me to give you this feedback, right? So, because the person might be wondering, right, why we are talking about this. And this is where you now give your context as a feedback giver. And I'm here talking about the needs and unmet needs. And I'm definitely using a bit more of emotional conversation, right? As you can see, the step number 1 about observation was more about facts. Step number 2, understanding others, is again more emotional step, right? Okay, help me understand what's going on with you, right? What led you do this, right? Instead of why did you do this? What led you to do this? I'm curious, right? This is now me also now saying, okay, this is my unmet need. This is a problem I'm having, right? And later we're going to see in step number 4, basically the question is, do you want to help me to fix my problem, right? Or to do and deal with this thing that do you want to help me meet my unmet need, right? And this is where this, sentence, help them to help you, right? If I'm expressing my needs and expressing my vulnerability, it looks more like a normal human being. And, again, people, when they open, when they show a bit vulnerability, the others want to help as well. So if step number 2 is probably going to be the most difficult, this one is going to be the most strange, or at least feeling uneasy, especially in the professional circles, right? In the organizations, we are not used to talk about feelings in professional organizations. At least I did some events on the other side of the Atlantic, right? And I did some events also within the Asian countries, but most of my experience working comes from the working within the Europe. And at least in the events in Europe, we are, as a judge program at events in Europe, a bit better at communicating feelings than average organization, at least in my experience. So there are reasons for that, also because most of the people do not consider judging as a profession and the source of livelihood. Therefore, it's more of a hobby where you expect to have friends, and with friends, you're more emotionally, right, connected. One of the things we kind of, for some reason, associate, professionality means absence of feelings. Again, it's starting to change and shift, and I believe it's good. But this is something that, feels very weird. And I can again give you a story. A couple of years ago, when I started actually introducing emotional speech in my working environment, right, I was talking to my boss after some unfortunate event, and I said, I'm very sad about what happened within this team. And this was a team I was working with. And my boss was like, it's not your fault. Like, you did everything fine, right? And at that moment, I realized, okay, my boss has a strong need to deal with my feelings now and, correct the unhappy feeling. And I responded, yeah, I understand I did nothing wrong. I just feel like I feel, right? And I'm feeling sad in this case. So I can tell you over the time, it got much better, right? Over the time, for example, now I'm doing this for, let's say, the last 4 years or something within my organization and within my team. And we have this notion of bring your full self to work, right? And sometimes we are grumpy, sometimes we are happy, sometimes we are sad, and that's perfectly fine. At least around my part of organization, things are moving in a different direction than they used to be before. So I'm going to ask you, does this make sense, or do you have any resonance? And in the meantime, I'm going to take the question. So Samuel, the why create some very uncomfortable situations with good and presentive judge in Brazilian group and new judges who are looking for direct answers. What did you say make much sense to me? Yeah, happy to help. Is this along the lines of saying this event made me feel? Where you share how you react to the observer's behavior? It avoids saying facts, but it's how you experience the event. Okay, let me use the Matteo example, right? Let's build this story a bit more. So as you can remember, I said basically, okay, Matteo, and we are gonna do it, right. So I'm gonna follow the steps. So I noticed that you came 12 minutes after we have agreed. Please help me understand what happened, right? So this was step 1, step 2. Now I learned about the Italian culture and I said, okay, cool, didn't know that. Thank you for helping me understand. However, I want to tell you also how you coming 12 minutes late, what it did with me, right? And for me, it was important that we start on time because this restaurant is very strict with the reservations. And if we are late, we're going to lose it. And this is a restaurant that was really looking forward to trying out in this city. That's an example, right? I don't need to use word feeling. I could, if I want to be a bit more personal, let's say the same example, but let's say I was more feeling personally disrespected. I could say, okay, Matteo, you coming 12 minutes later made me feel disrespected. And I don't like that. And I was expecting from a dear friend to not make me feel like that, right? And then this opens a conversation, right? And then I basically will see what the other person does. So I gave you here basically one, let's say more factual, right? We needed to be on time because of the reservation, or more personal reason where there were much more feelings, right? In any case, you need to talk about your needs, right? I use often the word need, right? So for example, let's imagine Matteo was late and he was late to this conference, right? And I need him for something. And then I would say, well, Matteo, I need you to start the conference. And I don't find it okay when there are 35 people waiting for me to start because I need you, right? So this is a different word of using the word need in a way, more literal. Liam, Brittany, does this answer your question? Or do you have, okay. If you have a sub questions, if you have resonance, if you see, yeah, okay, this makes sense, but can you tell me about this part? I'm happy to go as deep as you or anybody else want. These exchanges is actually what is the real meat of the conference, right? Or at least this presentation. Okay. So after, let's imagine this case with Matteo, and I have, told him how I felt disrespected. Then I'm waiting to see what they usually people will say, yeah, okay, that was not my intention. I'm sorry, leads to that one. And then you just say, okay. And I said, thank you. It helps me hearing you that you're, thank you for apology, helps me. How do we make sure that this doesn't happen in the future, right? Or in that case, I can say, okay, thank you for that. What I actually need is to know when we are going to meet, right? I need you to help me manage the expectations because then I can adapt, right? If I know you're going to be 12 minutes late, it helps me. Would you like to work with me on that, right? And this is the invitation to step number 4. So in the end, the idea is we work together on solving my need, right? One of the worst things you can do as a feedback giver is give a feedback and tell the other person, can you please take care of that? And for a couple of reasons. First, whoever you give the feedback to doesn't have the problem you have. You're the one with the unmet need. So at least from my point of view, you should participate in solving your own need, right? And secondly, if you're not part of that solution, there is a chance that whatever the other person does, it's actually not going to meet your need in the end, right? And then you're basically going once more through the whole thing with an additional thing of person being irritated because it says, well, I already solved it, and now you're telling me I didn't. I might just jump through these hoops so many amount of time, right? Depending how close we are as how strong our relationship is, right? So this is why it's important, and this is why I usually invite them people, okay, do you want to work with this on me, right? Do you want to find a way how we can deal with this, right? With this situation, right? Or if it is more personal, I would say, so, like, okay, do you want to help me work on on meeting my need, right? Because I know that the people sometimes, or quite often, do strangely react to things like needs. If there is a better context-fitting word, I might use it, right? Do you want to help me working on this, right? Because I just described this as it's important for me to know when you're going to be arriving, because then I can adapt. So if we were now in a real life audience, I would be drawing something, but here I'm going to ask you to use a bit of imagination and imagine at the beginning of this process, on one hand, so imagine a line. On one end of that line, it was me, feedback giver. On the other end is the feedback receiver. In between was this event that I have observed that has left me with unmet need, and now I'm giving feedback for that one. As part of this process, the idea is that we switch from position of me versus them, and in between us is this problem, to us together. So we are shifting sides, we are meeting at some place, and it's us on one end and this problem on the other, right? And you can see this moment, right? The steps 1, 2, 3 are actually building foundation for this. And step number 4 is when this thing happens. You can see it even earlier. As soon as the person starts to engage, right, or starts to resonate, right? If you ask, okay, help me understand, it's step number 2, and they start to explaining, and then you say, look, this is what I needed at that moment. I didn't get it, and the person is starting to be, sympathetic and, oh, I didn't want to that. My intention was not to do that. I really wanted to do this, not that, right? As soon as I see the person is kind of engaging with this in this conversation, right? As soon as it becomes a conversation or just, rhetoric, that's when I know, okay, these are the foundations for me to start moving in that direction. So, and when the person says, yes, I want to work on this, then this is actually when we have traveled and we have met, and now it's us versus the problem, or versus this unmet need. So I see Samuel, change who you are and your beliefs because I like more my way. Can you give me a bit more context about this one? Is this a situation you have seen? Is this something someone told you? Because I'm curious. I know how I would respond to this one, but I would like a bit more context, please. And while you're doing that, but let's imagine someone does tell you, right? And he says, like, do you want to help me in this one? No, I don't, right? Which is perfectly fine, because you ask a question, you got an answer, right? Doesn't mean that all of the questions you're going to be positive with. Yeah, somebody, I'm from Northern Germany, so, jokes and stuff like that. Anyway, one interesting quote I read the other day about, from Mark Twain says, German humor is not a laughing matter. Sorry for not getting your sarcasm. But imagine, a person can tell you, I don't want to help you there. And this is also valid information, right? And in that case, if that what happened to me, it says, okay, so then my counter question would be, okay, so how would you expect me to react next time when I see this and my need is not met, right? I might not say my need is not met. And for example, next time when you are late, and I need to rush it. Or I might say, well, this is, you know, this might not work for me, right? In this case. But anyway, then you know at least in which kind of relationship you are. Most of the people will want to help you. And again, what you want to help with, you want to see a change in behavior, and that change or that request needs to be visible to others, right? What doesn't help is, if I told myself, don't be late next time. What we agreed is on using a label, is it between 8 o'clock German time or 8 o'clock Italian time? And whoever is around us can hear us speaking about Italian and German time. They might be confused, but it's a visible to others. It's changing behavior we are in the end trying to do, not a change in personality, right? In the end, I do not care if a person is a punctual, lazy, or whatever, right? I care how that person's behavior affects me and my needs, in a way. So I work with that person on the environment, what is outside of their head, quote unquote, right? So I could say, let's assume that Matteo and I didn't have this agreement to using these labels. I could say, okay, would it be helpful if I send you a text message and reminding you that you're meeting in 5 minutes? Want me to call you? Do you want me to, what could I do to help you be on time? Should we meet at 8:30 in the future? Because, maybe the person tells me, well, I have this meeting finishing at 8 o'clock sharp, usually, and, I need 5-10 minutes to actually come down to the lobby because I'm having this, I don't know, video conferencing or whatever, right? And then we can move our thing to 8:15, which for me is fine. I will just make a reservation a little bit later. Okay, these are the 4 steps. If there are not any questions, but you can still ask the questions, I will go on the receiving feedback and actually look at these steps, but from a different perspective, right? I'm going to actually go here on the list. I'm going to tell you, okay, so how do I know if I'm moving too fast before we go into receiving feedback? I know if I notice defensiveness, right? If I'm, for example, if I move too fast to, in this case with Matteo and being late, if I ask him, okay, so what's going, help me understand, if I just said you were late and I moved to help me understand, he would probably say, but I wasn't late, right? So he resisting in that moment, my observation tells me, okay, we haven't finished this step. Or if I notice defensiveness when I start communicating my need and I says, well, this feels disrespectful. And in that case, if Matteo would say, if I notice with him disengaging from conversation, then I would say, okay, my intention was not to push you in any direction. What's going on with you? What happened, right? What just happened, right? I can understand more either about what happened just now, what happened about the previous. And usually step number 3, I wrap up with, does it make sense to you what I just said, right? And step number 4, you're going to see if we agree in the end on a change or not. That's how we know we are finished with step number 4. Do you consider something else when talking with someone about a repetitive behavior or habit? Well, I usually call them on it, right? So if I go through this process, we agree on something, and I see the person is not potentially sticking to that something, then this is a new observation, right? Then I start this cycle again, right? Okay, I notice we talk about these things, and now I'm seeing it again. What's going on, right? And then we talk about feedback, basically, right? Okay, was there something else? Should we try something new? Help me understand, right? I usually, I build the observation part. At some point, this might stop to be about, okay, let's imagine Matteo getting late, and this was a repetitive behavior. I might stop talking about him being late. I might start talking about, okay, we went through this feedback process a couple of times, and I'm confused. We went through this. It sounds good. We agree on something, but it doesn't stick. What's going on, right? Help me understand. Because now I'm starting to talk about our relationship. And then my need is no longer him just not being late. My need is, if we agree on something, and that's part of our relationship, a certain agreement, I need you to stick on that, right? And if you're not doing that, then I'm not trusting you anymore, right? Then I step away from whatever the content was and step into the relationship. That's maybe, quote unquote. Okay, I'm gonna go, Lee and Brittany, I'm gonna come back to your question. Isaac, do I get the extra 5 minutes since you were waiting for announcements? You know, asking questions and begging for time. While I'm waiting for Isaac's answer, I'm gonna be talking about receiving feedback very quickly. Before I go into the steps of that one, I want to talk about the mindset. And the mindset about receiving feedback is about, very difficult. I need to be open or defensive, right? Again, feedback is a gift. I might not like what I hear every time someone tells me, even though I want to talk to you about something, I'm usually, oh, what did I do wrong, right? I feel emotions, there is a little bit of guilt, there is not happiness, nobody likes to be wrong, quote unquote, right? But, I know in the end that having this information is more important than not having it. So what I usually do in that case is, I do something called labeling, and you can Google for it because it's a technique, right? It basically says, I tell myself, okay, I'm feeling now guilt, I'm feeling, anger. Good, hello, anger, right? I do this for myself, and that usually makes me, these emotions then are not as strong and powerful, and they don't take over. So there are different ways how to deal with emotions. In the end, the idea is it's not about eliminating them, it's about them not driving what you're doing. And this also means if in case I'm not ready to receive feedback, I might also say, okay, yeah, just give me 5 minutes or give me 10 minutes or give me tomorrow. Now is not a good time, right? And usually when I'm starting a feedback process, I ask people for permission. Do you have time? Are you okay? I would like to talk to you about something, right? Because one of the worst things that can happen, and I'm seeing it quite often at events, is, giving feedback to someone in between rounds because we are, waiting for the outstanding table, and maybe there is time to squeeze it in, right? Don't do that. Find time and make sure the other person has time and capacity and, headspace to do that. Another technique I can tell you is this closing the loop, right? Like I tell you in the step number 2, right? You're repeating what you have heard, right? So if a person is giving me feedback, I am gonna say, okay, okay, I understood you're telling me this and this. I'll be wrapping up, Isaac, in a second. I'll be, I have understood this and this. And this is the important part is, please correct me if I'm wrong. Again, giving a person, because correcting others is usually, potential conflicting situation. I'm giving here a person permission to correct me. And this works wonders. What am I changing about the process? Again, the only thing I change is I want to understand their context as a feedback giver to me as a feedback receiver before I give them my context, because otherwise it might sound defensive, right? So if you look at the steps, if you look at it from perspective, then the changes of the steps 2 and 3 are changing. But if you look at it from principle always says, understand the others before you being understood, right? And the moral of the story here is, because I know the process better than they do, I guide them through this. So if they just tell me, even you were late, let's not switch sides, right? Then I would say, okay, I came later than we agreed. Sorry for that. Are you interested? What's going on, right? And then I can guide them to say, okay, like, I'm sorry, didn't know this was very important, but it looks like it's very important to you. Help me understand where you're coming from, right? So in the end, I'm guiding them through the process by asking questions. So the same questions I'm using when giving feedback, I'm also using to receiving them. Just change shoes. And there is nothing else about receiving feedback. It's about the mindset, because it's very difficult to receive critical feedback. And it's about guiding the other person. So dealing with your own emotions. So I'll come to the questions and to the statements. Let me wrap up first. Most people will skip steps 2 and 3, which are those emotional steps, because we are not used to talk about it. However, this basically leads to, I see this is wrong, please fix it kind of feedback. Don't do that. This is, I call it hit and run feedback. And again, it sounds very ordering, and it's not actually a feedback, and it's going to lead to defensiveness. Practice will make you adequate, right? This 50-minute me talking to you will not change how you've been it's not going to change the decades of behavior you have. So these lessons are available as part of the Judge Academy. The exact same slides, come to them and practice. So this concept of deliberate practice. Take one part, take one step, take asking questions, and just do it for time until you get a feeling for it. And the most important part, besides those feedback gift metaphor, is understand before being understood and listen before speaking. If anything else you can forget, if you lead with these two sentences, when I started doing that, it changed my life and I started doing much more questions. So thank you very much. I'll now take some time to go through the questions. So if you want to stick around and listen to them, do so. If not, there is a break as well. So yeah, I want to share my experience as a manager that's Lee and Brittany, that when you share tough observations in the context of really caring about them and wanting to help them succeed can help a lot, yes. There are also many instances where you can offer to help if the recipient wants to receive it. Try not to just dump feedback, say goodbye. Yeah, exactly what I said in the end. Have you seen my slides before, Lee and Brittany? If you can offer a mentor or a coach, it can help show up that you care and you're invested in helping. Thank you. Okay, so we switch focus to the feedback process and the agreement and not to the subject itself. Thank you. Yep. What were the last two major lessons? They were too quick for me to write them down. Oh, I'll make these slides available. The major lesson, so I make these slides available immediately if I can upload them here in the chat, so you can find them. But in the end, from the giving feedback, it's important to help and guide them and keep yourself open, because it's not going to be easy. So learning how to deal with one's emotions. And second one was about not skipping the emotional parts, right? The steps 2 and 3. And listen before speaking. Understand before, they're basically the same sentence from different perspectives. So understanding before being understood, you achieve it by listening before speaking. And that's it. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for being here today. And if you have any questions, you can also reach me via Discord. And I'm happy to continue chatting. And I hope to see you at some point at some event, either digitally or in person. Have fun at the rest of the conference.